and I'm here with Alex, and we're trying to design a game codenamed Terrence for now. And the game is going to tell you about how to make a city. And Alex, feel free to interrupt me. The, the, the biggest thing we want to get across with the game is that cities evolve organically over time. A lot of the projects we're seeing are kind of master planned communities where there's kind of a set number of people, a set number of roads and infrastructure, and you raise funding and you start the city. That's not how real cities develop. And the Double GDP's idea is that we need 1,000 new cities of like 1 million people each in the coming years. And I don't think anyone can raise funds to build a city of 1 million people. So in order to solve that conundrum, like we have the city evolve over time. And that means that you evolve with the people that you get the land from, you evolve infrastructure over time and everything else. And we're thinking about a game where you have to make decisions, swipe left, swipe right, over time to kind of articulate that point. And what's also an idea is that everyone gets invested in the city, not just the person starting the city, but also the initial landowners. Instead of buying them big bucks that you don't have, or paying them big bucks for land that you don't have, you have them have part of the city. You get an option on the land and you acquire it over time as the city gets more valuable and that stock in the city gets more valuable. And then there's a big chicken and egg problem with the city. No one wants to live in a city with 10 people. It doesn't have the infrastructure, it doesn't have the services, it doesn't have the people that you want. So for the first people, you have to make them probably owner too to attract them to the city. And even when a city is large, I can see a future where cities are much more intentional about who lives there. If hypothetical example, but if Kylie Jenner moves to your city, it's going to be a lot more desirable to live there. People are going to be inspired and everything else. Why don't kind of influencers get paid to move to a new city? I know I would find it. Everyone has a list of people they would really love to be in their city, and cities are not intentional. They're not reaching out. They're not running it as intentional as it could be. And I think that will also be something else to focus on. And then there's just the infrastructure. I don't think you start off with a big build. You start off with very little infrastructure and you build it up over time as the city becomes more successful. So that's, I think, what we want to get across. You can start a city with like $0 down and kind of build it over time. And we see that happening in informal cities all the time. However, it's really important to kind of reserve space for public services, make sure you have a space for roads and other infrastructure, and make sure that there's taxation income to offer those services. Here I detailed some of the things that are different. Here I talk about some of the stages in growing the city, like how do you get options on the land. Here's some games that are inspirations. Here are kind of the 4 things you probably want to keep an eye on as you build a city. You want to keep an eye on the capital, like do you have enough money coming in? You want to keep an eye on the people, is it growing and what's their happiness? You want to keep an eye on the real estate, what's the plot price, are they selling? And you want to keep an eye on your investment in services. And maybe here you should keep an eye on the influencers too. There's gameplay, some basic interaction. We thought we'd do it through tweets that ask you. And here for many kind of dimensions of services, like all the way from water supply to air links, we think we can see how they kind of evolve over time. And here's some pictures to back that up that we could show in the game. Alex, any questions or things you'd like me to elaborate on?
So, wow. Yes. I'd like to ask you what would make a city fail. I'm very curious about that because making a game is about overcoming a challenge, and what the game should let you overcome.
Yeah, so I think a lack of momentum will let a city fail. Those landlords that kind of give you an option on their land in the future, they do it because they think it might be a good deal for them in the future. Those early residents that come, they do it because they think the city is going to expand. So I think as soon as the city is slowing down or like not attracting people anymore, I think you're immediately done, because now you can no longer sell kind of that future. So I think momentum is the most essential thing when starting a new city.
Okay, so momentum is some sort of characteristic that is derived from
population
all the different
growth.
Evolution.
That's probably the only one we need to look at. Is the city growing? Is it attracting more people?
Is it attracting more people? Okay.
Like cities of 10,000 people are not very attractive. 100,000 people, meh. Million people, attractive. 10 million people, like amazing city to live in. So it's kind of the bigger, the better. And if you start a new city, you basically have this promise, hey, we're going to get to 1 million people. And as soon as it's clear that you're not going to get there, it's not interesting, and people will move to the city that has that momentum.
So from a game perspective, the idea is that you want to get the highest momentum as possible and keep it as long as possible up until the point where you can you eventually lose your momentum because there's too much friction.
We could say at 1 million people, like you've won.
Yeah. Okay. So.
And as soon as you have the first kind of week without immigration, without net immigration, without people moving to your city, you've lost.
Yeah. Okay.
Just suggestions, like you figure it out.
It's good. It's a good idea. And so there's no per se win condition, but it's more like so if you reach like 10 million people and you're like, okay, good, you've won the game. That's it.
Yeah, I think already 1 million people, like that's good. Yeah. That's an Amsterdam, that's a San Francisco. That's a great city to live in.
And but still you can fail if you don't succeed to this point, right?
Yeah.
How do we say like, okay, it's fine, but it's not a big city and you won't go further than that?
It's a good question. I think some things you have along the time. So I think when you make the initial deal with the landlords, there's going to be some landlords that are open, like, okay, I'll sell my land if it's worth more than X, and X is a low number. And then some of them are, oh, I need Y. So at some point, if you don't hit the momentum you need, you're going to fail to acquire the land that the city needs. So that's kind of a failure condition as well.
So you have a time window within which you can build a city.
You selected a place, like it looks nice, you go talk to the people, the landowners are relatively amenable, and you're like, okay, how much do you need? And some people will be shorter term. They say, well, in 3 years, I need $1,000 per acre. I don't know. Some are like, oh, I want $10,000 per acre. And you're like, well, we can't do that in 3 years, but we might be able to do that in 7 years and get an option to buy it in 7 years for $10,000 an acre. But at some point, like if you get to the 7 years and you don't have the $1,000 an acre to spend, or I would pay in stock if that's okay, but you can say they can also ask for money. If you don't have that kind of valuation, you take too much dilution with your city. The city could be issuing stock all the time, but it shouldn't be more than like, I don't know, 1, 2, 3% to acquire the land. If it's like 50% dilution, everyone will become really upset and leave. Or like your stock price of the city will crash and you won't be able to attract people and you won't be able to issue stock to build services.
Yeah, but for the sake of having like a smaller scope, we can say that within 10 years, you need to reach the point where you can buy back the acres for the better price than it's actually worth, right? So like, for example, $10,000 or whatever number. Yeah, and maybe we can have that a fixed price.
Yeah, maybe talking about it, probably one of the most essential things is like the stock price, like the stock price of the city, because that is kind of the net present value of the future cash flows. So as long as you're still growing, that stock price is super high. But as soon as you kind of stop growing, then the future outlook goes down, your stock price goes down, and now it's hard to acquire the land with the stock. It's hard to get new services with the stock, causing you to slow down even more, causing you to fail.
Is it a failure if you still have a city that is like still a city with some people and a community living in real life? I mean, it's not the objective.
I think, like, let's take the most extreme example, a city with 10 people in it. And if you feel at that point, you won't have paved roads, you won't have sewage, you won't have water, you won't have an internet connection. Like, it's a campsite that you've built. So you spend a year and you build a campsite. It's not a great achievement.
Yeah.
And the people will leave. People will leave behind the cities. Like even in the US, you have like cities that are just empty, ghost towns. They don't longer make sense.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's okay. It's good. It's good. Okay. So okay, one condition. I was wondering, since it's closely related to double GDP, this game, and this game has this communication of like direct democracy, some tweets kind of thing. Is it like something that is offered by double GDP or is going to be offered eventually?
Direct democracy, you ask?
Well, not direct democracy, but I mean a way for people living in a city to talk to the entrepreneurs or people running the city.
Yeah. Well, for sure, you're going to have people talking to kind of this real estate holding company that's building the city. There's going to be in the city, there will be a democratically elected government. And there will be a mayor and everything else. However, they need to kind of collaborate really closely with this real estate investment company that is leasing out all the land, is doing most of the investments. So that's a very tricky thing to make happen. And people will sometimes appeal to the democratically elected government, and sometimes they will appeal directly to the real estate investment company that owns so much of the city and is so influential.
Yeah, especially within the first years, I think I mean, when you have 10 people, I mean, there's no like, it's not really a city, so there's no like a status for, even in France, I mean, there's no, it's nothing legally.
Yeah, it doesn't have a government or a local thing. So and that the city will be very much represented by the real estate company.
Okay. So there's like India it's not like we are building a city up until a point and then there is a handover to some sort of no. Okay.
And in the beginning, it's just a real estate company, and then you'll get the democratically elected local government on the side.
If there is any, because I don't know.
Well, I think every significant city has a mayor, and not all of them are democratic, but we're doing this from a bit of a democratic perspective. So I think it makes total sense to have a democratically elected local government.
Okay. No, I think on my end it's clearer now. I've seen in the prototype that you've made that there's this notion. There's the buy the facility right away. Say no, we won't buy this. And there's this third option that is the promise of having it. I think it's very interesting, but is it like something that should be that people should remember, and then you have a...
Yeah, I wanted to make it interesting with that, but I think in order to simplify, it's probably best to just buy it or not buy it and not have that other option, because then you get to do the swipe left, swipe right that you talked about. So I would remove that option.
Okay, yeah. Swipe left, right is good. Maybe it's not always well, it would fit here. Still, it's interesting maybe to not close the scope if it makes the game more interesting. I mean,
I think we have so much to work with. There's so many complex decisions. There's all the way from where you're going to start the city to acquiring the land, negotiating there. I think it's good to constrain us to a simple format. We've seen a game that is good with the kind of the binary choices. Let's stick with that. We can always decide to make it more complex later. I think for now we should try to get to kind of a prototype as soon as possible that we can play the complete game in. And then we can add complexity, but I think we've seen games where there's great complexity, even with binary decisions. I think it's a great constraint.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. We can do that. Yeah. So. Well, I need to get back to work then.
Great. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Cheers.